Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nowadays we are discussing about sampling techniques, various ways of conducting and collecting data, what kind of sampling techniques we can use to collect, what kind of data needs our research question requires. In the previous lecture we talked about what is sampling, what is the difference of consensus and survey, how do we do census and where do we do census, why do we do census, and where it is needed not to go for census but for sampling and surveys. When you need simple objectives to be verified using simple data sets for a small period of time with limited resources, definitely census become difficult thing. So what you do, you basically go for census become a difficult thing, so what you do, you basically go for sampling or survey. Simple thing what you do is you either choose probability or non-probability way of doing or conducting samples, and then you collect your data and you analyze and interpret it. And we have seen through a simple graph that sampling techniques are divided into probability sampling versus non-probability sampling. And within these two approaches we have seen that we have number of various options through which we can collect data. So for example, in probability sampling, which we covered in our last lecture, we have seen that we have simple random sampling, we have systematic random sampling, we have cluster sampling, we have multi-stage sampling, and these kind of techniques are there. And then we have seen one by one what is the advantages of these probability sampling techniques and why do we use this kind of sampling versus that kind of sampling, and we also have seen their limitations. Before looking into these things, we have also discussed about what is probability sampling, and we have seen that a probability sampling is the thing in which chances of occurring an event is almost equal. And we have discussed an example of a class where we have 25 or 30 students. So every student being selected or non-selected have a chance of 1 by 30 or 1 by 25 depending on the size of the class. Based on that, we have seen that we have simple random sample. We can collect simple random samples in which we see that we can generate through Excel simple random sampling, simple random number generators, and we can generate simple random numbers. Based on that, we can select our sample from a population. From population we need a simple sample, and from sampling we need what kind of data we want from that sample. So this is how randomly we can choose that. And with that we have also seen that we have systematic sampling, that we do randomly but systematic way. So what is randomness in that is that you choose the case or element of the sample randomly, but what you do is the systematic part in it is that every random number is proportionate or fractionate of the number that you want to actually collect data on. So if you have for example, if you have a sample in which you have some case or elements and you give unique number to each one of these. So you start from giving 0 to 1 case, first case, 1 to second case, 2 to third case, and so on. And based on that you kind of generate random numbers, and then you select your case. So every third, every second, every fourth, every fifth case, something like that. And then you realize that this has become a combination of systematic way of conducting simple random sampling, and we call it systematic sampling. Then we have stratified random sampling and cluster sample. So what we do in a stratified is that we basically make a stratification of our sample, and based on that stratification we select using either simple random sampling or survey material, or we use systematic sampling to collect data. Same is the case with cluster sampling, in which we divide groups, make groups based on clusters From those clusters, randomly we select few clusters, and from that selected clusters, what we do, we basically choose using either simple random sampling or systematic random sampling or stratified random sampling ways of collecting our data from that sample. And then we have seen that we have another case of multi-stage sampling, in which we combine 2 or 3 of these probability sampling techniques. And this is how in probability sampling we will be in a position to collect data one or the other way. And we have seen that there are 5 ways in probability sampling to collect data. The basis of these 5 particular approaches within probability sampling is that whatever kind of method we use, selection for every case or element is proportionate or equivalent to any other case or element. Again, the same example of the class, that if we have 30 students and we want to choose some random sample out of it, then the selection possibility of every single student within class is equal to 1/30th. So that's why we called it probability sampling. Today we are going to understand or try to see how we deal with non-probability sampling. And non-probability sampling is simply the reverse of what we had in probability sampling. So it is neither necessary nor sufficient to have probability of occurring the case or element within the data collection on equal intervals, or let's say equal chances of getting that number again. So that's why we call them non-probability sampling. So the probability that that case or element can be selected may vary. So let's move further and see how we deal with the non-probability sampling. So non-probability sample, the probability of each case being selected from the total population is not known. So it's not necessary that we know that the probability of each element or case selection within sample is equivalent to this or that. It is impossible to answer research questions or to address research objectives that require you or that required researcher to make statistical inferences about the characteristics of population. So statistical inferences are difficult to make, but still a researcher is able to generalize from non-probability samples about the population, and that lacks statistical ground. So what you do, you basically collect data. Let's say when TV anchors or TV persons or media persons go in the streets and ask people about their particular topic or perception about one or the other thing. Let's say they're asking about how do you perceive the rigging in election 2013. So the sample selection is not the probability sampling. They do non-probability sampling based on that anyone who is available at that particular moment on the street where they are interviewing can have chances to get interviewed. But that's not equal to the total number of people in the street that everyone has the chance to be selected, because they might have a limited time for which they are interviewing, and they just want to know the popular mass media thing and the popular consent or opinion of the people about one or the other thing. So that's why what you can conclude or interpret from that data can be generalized, but it lacks statistical ground. One of the reasons of lacking that statistical ground is lack of probability of being including each and every case or element equally in the sample. So what are the key considerations for non-probability sampling? There are 2, that we have to decide on a suitable sample size, and we have to select the appropriate technique. As we have seen that within non-probability sampling, like probability sampling, we have various techniques to collect data. So within probability sampling, we have seen we have 5 various kind of techniques: simple, random, systematic, stratified, cluster, or multi-stage sampling. But in non-probability sampling, we also have various appropriate techniques for selecting our sample. And for that, we have to see what kind of these techniques are, how do we use them, where do we use them, and all we'll be discussing in today's lecture. But first we have to decide about a sample of suitability, sample size of suitability, or suitable sample size. So we have to see that based on how many people's observations or opinions, we'll be in a position to generalize some idea about one or the other political, social, or economic happenings at national level. For example, the energy crisis in Pakistan, what people have in their mind or have their opinion about where this will lead us, where this economic crisis will lead the economy of Pakistan. So we have to understand the suitability of sample size, and we have to understand the appropriateness of the technique that we will use to collect non-probability sample. One thing that become clear from both this probability and non-probability sampling is the sample size and its importance. We have also seen in our previous lecture that sample size is very important. And in non-probability sampling, it's also because sample size helps in 3 different things to understand. Number 1, validity of your results and interpretation. Number 2, reliability of the results. And number 3, it helps in generalizing the opinion or results that you have got after data analysis. So for example, what you do, you basically collect data using a suitable sample size technique. And after collecting that sample size, suppose your response rate, which we have also discussed in our previous lecture, is close to 90 or 95%, or close to, let's say, 100%, which is not normally the case, but let's say it's very close to 100%, for example 95 or 97%. So out of that data, you will be in a position, because you have selected sample statistically on some grounds and you are justifying it, so whatever results or interpretation you get from that data analysis, you will be in a good position to validate the facts or the hypothesis that you have tested or the theory that you have in your mind using theoretical framework. Your analysis and the results of your analysis will be reliable, and finally you can be in a position to generalize your result. So this is how sample size is an important consideration when we talk about selecting sample, either using non-probability or probability technique. And within non-probability technique, we have various appropriate techniques. For example, we have quota sampling, where the population is large. We have purposive sampling, we have snowball sampling, we have self-selection sampling, and we have convenience sampling. There are others also, but we will try to see these, and the rest we will try to see if we can cover up in today's lecture or not. If we cannot cover them up today's lecture, we'll try to cover up in the next lecture. So quota sampling is basically entirely non-random, and it is normally used for interview surveys. So if you want to interview somebody, you decide about a particular quota, and then using that sampling technique you go and you collect your data. It is based on the promise that your sample will represent the population, as the variability in your sample for various quota variables is the same as that in the population. What you do, you basically divide population into various groups, and for each group you fixed a quota. So it's similar to various other things that you have seen for quota. For example, nowadays electricity quota for various sectors in Islamabad is that they'll get 2 hour electricity, and then they have to have load sharing or load shedding, we normally called it, for 1 hour. So your quota for electricity hours is 18 hours, and for non-electricity hours, when you don't have electricity, is 6 hours in 24 hours. So this is how quota is used. And that actually says that whatever variability you get in various population samples based on the quota system, they actually help you to generalize about the total or the whole population. Quota sampling is therefore a type of stratified sample. You see, it's quite relevant to stratified sampling, where you divide your population into various stratas and then you try to collect data from them. So quota sampling is a type, is relatively or closely linked to what we call in probability sampling as a stratified sample, in which selection of cases within strata is entirely non-random. We randomize stratas, but within strata the sample selection is non-random. So that's similar when we do quota. Based on quota, we divide population into various groups, and when we select from those groups, we do it non-randomly. And that's how quota sampling help us to collect data from large population. So, and here comes the details, that we have to divide the population into specific groups, calculate a quota for each group based on relevant and available data. So let's say for distribution of let's say some money or some other kind of basic necessity food items to people who are affected by earthquake or flood. Like in Pakistan we had flood in 2010, 11 and 12. So if you want to distribute some food and non-food items, what we do, quota sampling can also be used, that we group them based on villages, village wise, or based on how much destruction they got. Let's say how much destruction they got for their lands or for their houses or for their water channels if it is in rural area. So we group them into different things based on, let's say, water channels, based on land destruction, based on household destruction, based on family members, and from there non-randomly we can be in a position to select sample. Give each interviewer an assignment which states the number of cases in each quota from which they must collect data. So interviewer can go, and from that particular group which he got assigned, he will have to collect some data based on interview using non-random sampling technique. Let's say if the group consists of 100 people, he might choose 20 or 25 to interview them, or 15 to interview them, so that they'll be in a good position to understand what is the dynamics or group dynamics. Combine the data collected by interviewers to provide full sample. So for each group you have a different interviewer who go there, interview the various groups, and then you combine the whole data. So let's say we have 5 groups, we go 5 interviewers there, we send 5 interviews there, they collect data, they come up to the place where the data can be compiled. So you combine the whole 5 data sets from 5 various groups into one full sample, and we call that as quota sampling. And in quota sampling, the advantages, quota sampling has a number of advantages over probabilistic or probability techniques. For example, it is less costly and it is relatively quickly. So probability sample techniques are relatively costly because you have to design them nicely so that you don't become a biased researcher. So to avoid biasness, you have to design them nicely so that you can avoid researcher or personal bias out of your data collection, and your results and data interpretation can be unbiased and robust. So if that is the case, you definitely need to design it nicely. For that thing you might need more time and it can be more costly. But for quota sampling, you just divide the whole population into various groups. You send interviewers to various groups to collect data from them using any design, because the selection of respondent or case or element from that group is non-random. So that's why quota sampling is relatively less costly and it can be set up very quickly. And if your data collection needs to be undertaken very quickly, then quota sampling frame, and therefore maybe the only technique you can use if one is not available. So it's very easily applying or easily usable technique. For example, as with television audience research survey. So what you do, you go into any of the streets, you want to know how youth perceive election 2013, and you just go into the streets, you find some youngsters, girls and boys, and you collect answer to the question that you want to ask. And in that way you basically come up from this data collection for quota sampling. So this is how quota sampling is relatively less costly and can be set up very quickly, and hence it is very important way of collecting large data from large population in relatively less time. Now we have purposive sampling. Purposive or judgmental sampling enables you to use your judgment to select cases or elements of sample or population that will best enable you to answer your research questions and meet your objectives of research. So based on your judgment, you will be in a position to say that according to my judgment, it will be nice to interview this or that kind of responsible person, so that we will be in a position to grasp as much information as we can. This form of sample is often used when working with very small samples, such as in case research, and when you wish to select cases that are particularly informative. Case research, when you do, we have already studied in research design various research strategies, where case study is one of the research strategy. Within case study, if you want to get in-depth information for your data analysis, and you see the various stakeholders, based on your judgment you decide that if you want to collect data for rural lands, then the best person to ask is Patwari. So what you can do, you basically decide on your own judgment. You go and ask questions from Patwari about land records, what kind of land is there, how people own it, what is the average size of land holding, and all these kind of things. This is how it actually helps understanding your population, case or elements that you want to interview, and how you can collect data. It can also be helpful in case studies. Purposive sampling can also be used by researcher adopting the grounded theory strategy. We have also seen that we have to have this grounded theory strategy, and we have learned it in previous lectures. Purposive sampling can also be used there. I hope you know what is grounded theory and how it can be applied using purposive sampling. For such research findings from data collecting from your initial sample inform the way you extend your sample into subsequent cases. So that's also an important thing, that you select one case, based on your judgment you go to various cases or elements of the population, you ask information, you come up with some idea, and that basically helps you to get more information using the same idea that you have used in that particular case. Such samples cannot be considered to be statistically representative of the total population, as is the case in previous non-probability sampling, that is quota sampling. Here it is also that we cannot statistically represent the generalizability of our results in purposive sampling, but it can be generalized to say something about population, but they lack a statistical ground. And now we will be talking about extreme or deviant sampling. So it focuses on unusual or special cases on the basis that the data collected about these cases or outcomes will enable you to learn the more. So when you see an unusual or extreme case or deviant case, what you do, you try to collect as much information as possible about that particular case. about that particular extreme case or deviant case from the normal thing, so that you will be unable to understand as much as you can, and that helps you to answer your research question or research questions that you have. That also helps you to meet your objectives effectively. That sampling or extreme case deviant sampling is actually based on the promise that findings from these will be relevant in understanding or explaining more typical cases. So Pattern 2002 has actually said that whatever you get as an information or as an analysis of the data from extreme or deviant cases will be helpful to understand the dynamics within that extreme case, to interpret it for other extreme cases. So that's how you can link one extreme case to another extreme case if their happening is similar to what is happening somewhere else. For example, the earthquake of Haiti and the earthquake of Pakistan in 2006. So what international donor organizations, NGOs, philanthropists within Pakistan and outside Pakistan across globe can learn from various dynamics of these two difficult or different earthquakes in two different country contexts. There might be some similarities, there might be some differences, but a case study that we have had, or extreme case study information that we have had one or the other way from within Pakistan or from Haiti or from some third country, will help us understand the condition more effectively, and that's how it helps in meeting your research questions and objective effectively and efficiently. So now we have maximum variation or heterogeneous sampling. What it does, it enables researcher to collect data for explaining and describing the key themes that can be observed. So for example, let's take the most diverse society, that is Lebanon, where Muslims, Christians and Jews are living together. Or let's take the example of India, where you have Sikh population, where you have Hindus and Muslims living together. Their religion is different, their culture is different, their food habits are different, but they are living together. So that's how heterogeneity or maximum variation sampling technique can help us understand and observe the key themes and the main understanding of that particular phenomena. And it helps also to explain and describe the main ideas or main themes that are existing in your research questions or research topic. Although this might appear contradictory, as a small sample may contain cases that are completely different, but Pattern argues that this is in fact a strength. So within a sample or small sample, you can have various different heterogeneous or variant samples, but it is argued that heterogeneous or maximum variation sampling also help us explaining the maximum variation within the sample framework, and any patterns that emerge are likely to be of particular interest and value and represent the key themes. So whatever patterns or trends that emerge from that analysis of that particular heterogeneous population, that help us to generate some trends and ideas about that population. In addition, the data collected should enable you to document uniqueness. Then you'll be in a position to uniquely identify what are the trends and patterns that exist in that particular heterogeneous or maximum variant sample or group which you want to analyze. And it helps in ensuring maximum variation within a sample. Pattern suggests you identify your diverse characteristics, sample selection criteria. Then again, sample selection or sample size is becoming important to understand prior to selecting your sample. So you have to identify, number one, sample selection criteria. Once you know based on what criteria you are selecting sample, then you have to decide what kind of sample you actually need. So if you want to ensure maximum heterogeneity or maximum variation within this heterogeneous sampling technique, you first have to decide based on what criteria you are selecting your sample. Once you are sure about your sample selection criteria, then you will be in a better position to select your sample. So sample selection criteria is very important, because if you don't do the sample selection criteria, then you might miss some relevant, more important information. This is just a simple example that we did when we were doing this literature review, where we have decided that once using key terms and keywords, you will be in a position to get some literature. What you can do is you have to select what is most relevant to your research questions and objective, and there you have used selection criteria, that is inclusion or exclusion criteria. Based on what criteria you are taking this study for your dissertation, and based on what criteria you are not including this study for your literature review. And this is how you kind of excluded or included one or the other study for your literature review. So similar kind of understanding goes here in heterogeneous or maximum variation sampling technique, that you have to have a criteria for selecting a heterogeneous sample. So when you have a criteria, then you will be in a position to select your sample. In direct contrast to heterogeneous sampling, we have another way of sampling, is the homogeneous sampling technique. Homogeneous sampling focuses on one particular subgroup in which all the sample members are similar. So what we do, we choose a big company where higher ups are actually dealing within same department called human resource management. So how within human resource management department a particular subgroup is working, or let's say in a finance department a particular group of accountants working, and that's how we can get into homogeneous sampling. What it enables us is in great depth analysis and collection of data and information, and also to study the group in a great length and depth. So that's how homogeneous sampling is contrasting to heterogeneous sample, where you collect in homogeneous sample a subgroup within a bigger group, and you have similar characteristics of that, and then you want to collect greater depth of the knowledge from that group. Now we have critical case. Critical case sampling select critical cases on the basis that they can make a point dramatically or because they are important. Based on importance or dramatic nature of that particular case, will be in a position to select a critical case using critical case sampling technique. The focus is on data collection to understand what is happening in each critical case, so that logical generalizations can be made. So for example, in election 2013, the critical thing was that the voter turnout has increased from all the previous elections within Pakistan. So take one union council or constituency, or 2 or 3 constituencies in rural and urban areas, and take them as critical cases to explain the phenomena of voter turnout increase or rate of increase in voter turnout. That's how you basically get in-depth or important understanding for that particular case. Or let's say increase in voter turnout based on gender. Female has voted a lot or more in election 2013 compared to other elections that has happened in Pakistan. That also helps in generalizing the logical consequences or logical interpretation from the data that we have collected using critical case study. And within critical case sampling, pattern has also outlines a number of clues that suggest critical cases, and that we have summarized below. So what are these clues? And if it happens there, will it happen everywhere? We have to try to see that is it a critical case. I mean, there is something that happened in front of you once, whether you can think or judge that it is going to happen everywhere. Or for example, that based on gender analysis, we have seen that this time women in urban areas have voted more. Do you think in every election it will happen this way? So this is how we have to logically understand the questions that come up within critical case sampling. If they are having problems, can you be sure that everyone will have problem? So you have to see the surety and the link between the criticality of the case and the nature of criticality within the case. If they cannot understand the process, is it likely that no one will be unable to understand the process? So we have to see, can we generalize based on one or the other opinion, based on one or the other information about what we have as a critical case versus what we have critical cases. So within one critical case there might be some things that is happening. Can we see, or can we say, or can we summarize that is it going to happen with other critical cases or not? If it is going to happen or it is not going to happen, that is very important to understand the criticality of the case that we want to sample or that we want to study. So that's why it is outlined by Pattern in 2002 that we have to have a number of clues that suggest critical cases, whether the case is critical or not. So based on these three questions, we'll be in a position to decide the critical nature of the case. So first is that if it is happen here or there, will it happen everywhere? If people are having or they are having problems, can researcher be sure that everyone will have the problems? And if they can't understand the process, is it likely that no one will be able to understand the process? So if we answer these questions logically, then we'll be in a position to understand whether the case is critical or it is not. Now we have typical case. First we had critical case, now we have typical case, which is contrast to what we had in critical case. So we had heterogeneous or maximum variation sampling, and opposite to it or contradictory to it or contrasting to it is homogeneous sampling. Now we had critical case sampling, contrasting to it is typical case sampling. Typical case sampling is usually used as a part of research project to provide an illustrative profile using a representative case. So what you do when you set up your research questions and objectives, and you have done your literature review and you want to collect data through one or the other way, and you have collected data, then what you do, you use a typical case sampling technique that verifies your results from the data analysis. And that's how we understand typical case, that usually used as a part of research project to provide an illustrative profile using a representative case. So a case you will select from your field or from particular area where you are or from the case or element of the population where you are collecting your data, and then that case is relatively representative of the whole population on which we are conducting our research project. Such a sample enables us or enables researcher to provide an illustration of what is typical to those who will be reading the research report the researcher is writing and may be unfamiliar with the subject. When you're writing a report for a larger audience, then you have to be careful that when you're generalizing something, you have to have some typical case study. For example, if you want to say that financial development leads to economic growth in this or that condition, then we can give an example of China or India or Pakistan or Brazil from various studies, referencing these studies, saying that these typical case studies tells us that in these countries financial development actually led us to economic growth, and it is not intended to be definitive. So it's not definitive, but it actually supports your argument that you are generalizing about the whole population. Now we have snowball sampling. Snowball sampling is commonly used when it is difficult to identify members of desired population. When we are unable to identify who can be the member of the population that we want to observe, or that we want to select some sample, then we will be in a position to use snowball sampling. For example, people who are working while claiming unemployment benefit, you therefore need, or researcher therefore need to do these following things. What are these things? Number one, make contact with one or the two cases in the population. Ask these cases to identify further cases. Ask these new cases to identify further new cases, and so on. Stop when either no new cases are given or the sample is as large as manageable. So we have 4 important things that we basically can be in a position to use in snowball sampling. So one is that try to establish the contact of 1 or 2 cases within the population. So for example, you develop 1 or 2 cases within population, you contact them, you interviewed them based on your research questionnaire or whatever kind of information you want to get from them. So what you ask in the end is, do you know anyone who is also suffering or who is also having the similar characters that you have, so that we can interview them. So what you do as a second step, that you ask these cases to identify further cases, asking for identification. So contacting 1 or 2 people from the population where you want to interview. Based on these 1 or 2 people's interview, you also ask them if they can give you some other references or identify some other cases from where you can get some information or you get interview from them. And then what you do, from the next 2 or 3 or 4 whatever number of cases or elements they have identified, you start asking if they know anything about it. So what you do, you basically ask new cases to identify further cases, and this goes on till you have got a manageable or as large as sample that is manageable. That's very simple but a time consuming process. You have to find some you have to find some cases from the population you want to interview, and then you move on as a snowball. So the simple idea can also be given in literature review when you don't find much of the literature on the topic of your research. So what you can do, you try to find 1 or 2 paper if they exist or close to your topic, and from their references you try to see that in the end whatever references or bibliography that is given, does it help you to get some more papers that are relevant or closely relevant to your research area. And if that is the case, you try to download those papers and then again look into the references and bibliography of those research papers. This is one way of looking at the information that you required or that you are looking for. The second way is to contact the authors through their emails or fax numbers that is giving, by writing a fax or an email and asking them to help you find out more expert or researchers or professors or relevant literature that they can come across or that they know can help you find the relevant literature or ideas that is related to your research questions and topics. And based on that, you further clarify, you further understand, you move further from those clues to get more information to a certain level where you get a sample which is as large as manageable, and you can also be in a position to say something in concrete logically based on grounds that you have a data which helps you interpret at least the sample you have observed, and that will also be generalizable in non-statistical sense about the whole population. So during snowballing, or when we try to conduct snowballing, we have to understand these 4 simple steps that try to establish a contact with one or the other case or element, ask them for further contacts, from those further contacts try to ask further contacts, and so on. You can go on asking and collecting data and information until you get a sample that is as large as manageable. And then you go for another technique which is known as self-selecting sample. It occurs, or it is used when researchers allow each case, usually individuals, to identify their desire to take part in the research. It is normally given in public health, where you want to test one or the other technique or medicine that you have recently innovated, so that people who are under as a research experiment have their own willingness to take part in the research. And if that is the case, we have to understand 2 important considerations: that data collecting from those who respond, and we know that those who have came to be the part of the research, we have to collect data from them only. Secondly, it publicizes the researchers' need for cases, either by advertising through appropriate media or by asking them to take part. So what you do in self-selecting sample is you advertise in newspaper that we are launching this or that kind of thing, or we want to select, let's say, a model for one or the other product that we are launching for an ad. So what you do, you advertise in media, print media or electronic media, and based on that, whoever comes in, you select as individual cases, and then you collect responses from those who are selected. So this is how self-selecting sampling technique can be used. Publicity for convenience samples can take many forms. These include articles, advertisement in magazines that the population are likely to read, postings on appropriate internet news groups and discussion groups, hyperlinks from other websites, as well as letters or emails of invitation to colleagues and friends. So this is how you can promote that for this or that particular purpose or need, you need some case or element so that you can have some data collection or information from them. Cases that self-select objectives, for example, in some instances, as in research questions or stated on the management of survivors of downsizing, this is exactly what researchers want. So self-selective objectives becomes as cases of this sampling technique. And in this research, a letter in the Personal Trade Press generated a list of self-selected organizations that were interested in the research topic, considered it important, and were willing to devote time to being interviewed. So this is how you do it. You select, you ask them that you have this or that kind of interest, you want to do this or that kind of research based on your research questions and objective, and if somebody shows interest, then you select cases based on one or the other way, and then you get some information, and you get responses only from those who are selected as self-selected case. So people decide first by themselves that they want to take part in that particular process of research. That's why we called it self-selection. So rather than interviewer selecting the interviewee, interviewee selects first him or herself, and then he or she gets agree to be interviewed or to be used as a case or element for data or information collection. Then we have convenience sampling. I've also discussed in my last lecture that convenience sampling is a way of sampling which is normally used by graduate or undergraduate researchers for their dissertation, precisely because of the reason that they are lacking, number one, financial and human resources, and number two, their time is limited. And if that is the case, going for probability sampling using one or the other ways of conducting probability sampling will become a relatively difficult task for them. That's why they go for convenience sampling, which actually involves selecting haphazardly those cases that are easiest to obtain for your sample. So if you want to interview youth about one or the other perception, then you just select those who are between the age of 18 and 35, from wherever they belong to, whether they are university students, whether they are working somewhere else, whether they are just passed out from the university. Any person who is under the age of 18 to 35 you can select by saying that we need to collect data from 300 or 400 or 200 or 500 youth members of the society within, let's say, a particular area, for example Multan or Lodhna or Vihari. So you can decide about whether you want rural or urban or both. So that's how you decide about the convenience sampling. Such as the person interviewed at random in a shopping center for a television program, or the book about entrepreneurship you find at the airport. So this is how you do convenience sampling. The sample selection process continued until your required sample size has reached. So if you have decided to interview 300 people, you just go at random, haphazardly, find some people, interview them, and if you have interviewed almost 300 people or already 300 people, then you think that your sample size is enough to analyze and get some statistical basis for it. The sample selection process will continue until the sample size has been reached. Although this technique of sampling is used widely, it is prone to bias and influences that are beyond researchers' control. So bias can be that because you are living in a vicinity where you can find easily these kind of respondents, so you try to use convenience sampling so that you can within your vicinity easily can go about, ask questions and get some information, and that's how it introduces bias. Maybe the kind of results that you want to get, you go and interview those people where you can get these kind of results, as the cases appear in the sample only because the ease of obtaining them. So because it is easy to obtain information from them, you go only to meet those who can give you answers easily. That is how that is unable to control the bias that exists in convenience sample, and it often intended to represent the total population. For example, managers taking an MBA course as a surrogate for all managers. So you realize or think or understand that those managers who are taking as MBA course can be representative of all the managers within an organization or within various organizations. In such circumstances, instances, the selection of individual cases is likely to have introduced bias in the sample. So how do you select those individuals? If it is using convenient sampling, that is non-random, so what you do, you basically introduce a bias in the sampling, meaning that subsequent generalization are likely to be at best flawed. So generalization about the population can be misleading or must not be robust, and these problems are less important where there is little variation in the population. If it is homogeneous population or less variant population, then might be a researcher is in a good position by using convenience sampling to generalize something. But if it is not the case, it's very difficult, and such samples often serve as pilots to study using more instructed sample. Convenience sampling can also be used as a tool to understand your pilot as in a study, and then you will be in a good position to conduct the full data using one or the other technique for data collection. So this is how we understand convenience sampling. Today we are ending here, and we have discussed non-probability sampling, where we have discussed number of things. For example, convenience sampling, homogeneous, heterogeneous sampling, extreme and typical cases, and then we have also seen about quota and snowball sampling. We have seen these both kind of probability and non-probability sampling to understand what kind of data needs or research designs we have for our study, what are the needs of data for our study we have, and how do we be in a position to collect that data for particular study that we are looking for, or for particular research question that we have for our study. Based on the research questions and objectives, we'll be in a good position to decide whether we are going for probability or non-probability sampling, and within probability and non-probability sampling, what kind of particular sampling technique we will be using. That will help us to understand the whole scenario, the way we are conducting or collecting data, and it helps us to understand the whole process of analyzing and interpreting our results that lead us to answer the question we have asked in our research proposal or research dissertation, and also help us to match with the objectives that we have set for our research process. Today we end up here, and inshallah in the next lecture we will come up with a new topic. Khuda Hafiz.